So I'm going to start this morning by asking you what you might consider a rather silly question. If you could have any superpower, what would you choose? Now, maybe because I've watched too many Marvel movies or read too many comic books, but I find that it's kind of a question that has occurred to me before. If I could choose any superpower, what would it be? Now, flying sounds pretty cool, but I'm afraid of heights, right? Being very fast also is pretty awesome, but I'm too lazy. X-ray vision, being invisible, that sounds like superpowers for peeping Tom, so it doesn't appeal to me whatsoever. None of those powers really appeal to me. So as I ponder that question, it occurs to me that really, you know what I think the coolest superpower would be this ability to heal other people. That, I think, would be meaningful and an effective power to be able to have. It occurs to me that all the comic books I've read, all the Marvel movies I've been to, it's one of the few powers not really featured. As I thought about that, I thought that was interesting. There ought to be a super healer. It's not a particular superpower that appeals. Now, I remember thinking about this appeal of healing, the power to heal, many years ago. Probably one of my favorite all-time movies was a movie called Resurrection. It came out in the 1980s. Anyone here seen the movie Resurrection? Well, good. I could tell the story and you won't contradict me or anything. So, the story was about a woman who played by Ellen Burstyn, who's one of my favorite actresses. And the movie begins that she is involved in a car accident with her husband who unfortunately dies. And what happens is she dies as well, but has this out-of-body experience in which she returns back to life. She's paralyzed from the waist down, but she discovers, after having come back from death, that she has this capacity to heal herself and others. She discovers this ability to heal, and she's taken by her father back to a small town, her hometown in Kansas, and she begins to heal herself, where she walks again, but then she begins to heal people around her, and obviously this then gets the attention of many people, and they start coming to this small town where she heals people as they come. They even have scientists and doctors who come and test her to see, is this real? And it is. And it's a really amazing scene to see these desperate people really yearning to be healed and her capacity to do so. Though, at one point, people begin to say to her, well, this is too much power in one person. You must declare yourself as Christ resurrected. And she says, no, this comes from a place of compassion, a place of peace inside her, but she's not really sure she could say, and would not say, she was Christ resurrected, which led to some conflict, which led to actually her life being threatened. And I love that movie. It really appealed to me, this idea that we could be healers. Now, not healers in some vision of a televangelist. Anybody here ever heard of Benny Hinn? Yeah, Benny Hinn. Benny Hinn was this healer, famous in Christian circles, long time ago. I think he's still around, maybe doing it. Has these big tent revivals, and kind of the stereotypical kind of you're healed, and people get up and walk, or healed, and actually it all turns out it's fake. And yet people still come to his shows, which are these huge spectacles. But that's interesting as compared to Jesus in his stories in which he is healing. It's very mundane, very daily in some ways. And often Jesus would tell those that he heals, he said, don't tell anybody about this. There's a quality of humbleness, a quality of compassion, a quality of kindness and understanding Jesus exhibits as he heals others. So then there's this story that we read this morning from the Acts of the Apostles. Now, one of the things I always believe is the best evidence of the truth of resurrection of Jesus was that there was this ragtag group of disciples who had run away when Jesus got in trouble, who had even denied Jesus, who spent most of their time walking around listening to Jesus going, "What? What did he say?" Over and over, they just stumbled on themselves, but suddenly, all of a sudden, this group that was frightened, that was hiding after the crucifixion, and then the resurrection happens, and somehow these men and women are transformed into these courageous people who go to the synagogue and preach and pray and speak of God's kingdom of justice and peace and compassion. People bravely saying things that they will often hide before. And in our story, you can't help but see this. This is only the third chapter in Acts. Have this power now to heal a lame man. Think about that. These disciples, these apostles, these men and women who follow Jesus, all of a sudden can heal others. It's been passed on to the community and to the church. And it makes me wonder, it's an odd question, I know, an odd thing to assert, but does that mean we as the church have the superpower to heal others? Now, again, I'm not talking some Benny Hinn kind of thing, but really, do we ever think of the church as this space and place where people experience healing? And again, you might find that incredulous, maybe even somewhat ridiculous to assert that, a kind of magical thinking more fitting in comic books and Marvel movies. But I want to put forward to you this morning this idea that part of our calling, a central part of our calling, that a central part of what it means to be the church is to be people who heal others. We are called to be a community that heals. So let's look at that story that we read here. That as John and Peter go into the temple, this lame man who had come weekly, or daily, I think, to come beg alms, that when they come and they go in to pray at the temple, a sign that a very important part of their identity still was Judaism, in that the commitment to Judaic practices, going to the temple and praying every afternoon at 3 p.m., and there's the man, the lame man, who's laying at this particular place that comes in and asks people for alms. He sees Peter and John and he asks them. And then what's interesting is that Peter, it says, looked intently at him. As did John, we're told. Looked intently at him. Well, what's interesting about that is that Peter, how many people walked by the lame man begging for alms? How many people walked by and didn't see him? I don't judge them. Because how often do I walk down the street and don't pay attention to a homeless man or woman? How often do I not pay attention to those who are hurting in the world? And to make a point even more profoundly, Luke says that they asked this lame man to look at them, to really look at them, and for them to look at who the lame man was. And the lame man, this beggar, does look at them intently, but in part, Luke points out because he's hoping that they'll give him some money, some alms. And Peter says, I have no silver or gold, but what I have, I give you. And what does he have? In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, stand up and walk. He puts out his right hand, we're told, and he lifts up the lame man, and he walks into the temple to pray with him. We're told his legs strengthened along with his ankles, that he walked in with him and jumping for joy. What an incredible, interesting, meaningful story that says something about how we as the church, how we as disciples can be a community of healing. Healing is more than fixing a disease or illness or a physical condition. Healing, in many ways, is being seen. It's seeing the other who is lame and broken and saying, I pay attention to you. You are important. You are a beloved child of God. That is healing. I think of those in our society who are often not seen, often pushed to the outskirts. I think of LGBTQ children and youth who are not welcomed, who are mistreated, and how often the church has not said, I see you, but pushed them aside. How healing is it if we see them and welcome them and embrace them in our community, right? That's healing. You're one of us. We love you. You are important. And it's interesting, healing is more than giving money. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't, and we as a church provide funds, we give money in different places. Those are so important. But really, healing is, the true healing is that we show you the embodied love of God in Jesus of Nazareth. It's not the gold and silver we give. The best healing we can give to others is not simply throwing money at it, but instead throwing ourselves at the brokenness in the world. It's offering a hand to lift them up so that they can dance and pray and walk themselves. I have no gold and silver to give. What I have to give to you is my hand. Right? So, while I may not be able to heal cancer, what I can promise you is that I will hold your hand in the midst of this journey, right? I may not have the power to heal your addiction, but what I do have is my hand to be with you as you struggle every day. I may not be able to fix your mental illness, but what I do have is a hand that welcomes you into our community, that walks with you, praying alongside you, right? you're not alone. Recently, I came across, there's an author named Margaret Wheatley. Many of you may not know, she's not a household name in any way, but she's rather famous in business circles and in community circles for writing on leadership. She's hired often by corporations, but she's very much seen as a goal in her life, she says, to kind of create a kind of leadership where we make a difference in the world, where we make a difference in a world in which we make it more peace-filled, in which we make it more compassionate world. And she's always had that guide her principles. And I think she's about 80 now. And she's recently written, just in the past year or so, a number of books, reflecting on, she says, the real challenges we face today. She says, we live in a world, we've tried our best to create a more compassionate and loving and caring world. We've tried to create leaders in government, leaders in business, leaders in community organizations, and it just seems like we're not getting there, right? It just seems like the world is getting worse and worse and worse. And she wrestles with that question. It seems almost a perfect storm of human-created catastrophe, of climate change, of the lack of peace, and that there's only so much we feel like we could have done. We haven't had the proper leadership in the world, but it really feels like we're living in a time in which we're giving up. And she writes, you know what? We need to change our vision here, at least in this particular time. She says, what we need to do is create these islands of sanity. What we need to create are these spaces, these islands of sanity in which people can be more generous, people can be kinder and more compassionate towards each other. And that really our task, maybe, it ultimately would be to change the world, but maybe what we live in now, the best we can do is create these islands of sanity. And I loved that image. Because what is a church? A healing church, but this sanctuary, this space, this place that is an island of sanity. We are called as disciples to be those spaces for healing in a very broken world where wars break out, where we see the images we see on television. And yet, our hope is in this space, in these people who are an island of sanity. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.